That's how it's gonna be, a little test tube.
It's most likely to be a highly infectious virus.
Guy steps out of Times Square station, smashes it on the sidewalk.
Welcome to Zero Net Review, a show dedicated to handcrafted studies of genre fiction. I'm author DC McNeill, and Patrick is on leave this week. He's enjoying the sights and sounds of Japan. So instead, I'm joined by just J.M. Anderson, a savage bushman from the north, here to plunder your cattle and steal your clothes in the night.
Out of all of the different people in the book I could have been, and I get labeled as a bushman. So I see what you think.
There's
okay.
like 5 good, cool guys I could have chosen. I'm like, nah, the racialized,
the most
bandits.
uncivilized one.
Oh yeah. God, this book. Welcome back to our continued study of the post-apocalypse genre, brought to you by the Zero Indent Patreon subscribers who make the shows and articles that shape Zero Indent. Today we are reading Richard Jefferies' 1885 seminal apocalypse story, After London. What did you think of this book? We kind of said this in last minute. We'll talk about I Am Legend when Patrick's back, but you know, I figured this was a good place to go to. This is the first. This is widely considered to be the first apocalypse story, and so I thought we should eventually cover it. And my memory of this book is that it's a book that is written kind of exclusively for your brain in a way that is fascinating to me. Yeah, what did you think of it?
So the novel is incredibly odd for anyone who's not read it, where it's split up into 2 different parts, and the first part is literally just world building and only world building. So it goes through like the whole history sort of what happened that like after the apocalypse, but it doesn't actually say what the apocalypse was. It just is like, in the after time, this species of grass has transformed into this species of grass, which now grows in these specific places.
It goes on
and these
forever.
shrubs. Yes, and I was like, on one hand, like, I love this because, like, world building is one of those things that you have to spend, and I felt like I was into the story more because all this stuff was going in, but then also, these are the things that my brain cares the least about. Like, assigning all of these proper nouns to what like, pigs and sheep and cattle have evolved into. Like, they all have their new names and stuff. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care what the species of grass and tree and all of this stuff is. I barely care about the names of the protagonist. Like, I will just call them hero and heroine and stuff like that, and I would be absolutely fine with it. So that first section was a struggle, especially because this author only cares about, like, 1,000 years after whatever the apocalypse was. And there's there's only theories about what it might have been, but the theories were just like, oh, people went east. Maybe.
They're like, oh,
traveled.
Yeah, maybe the rich people went east. We think maybe. I don't know. And then later on, it's like, oh, maybe it was chemicals or whatever. And it's, I guess in Jeffrey's defense, like, nuclear weapons haven't been invented yet, so there's no easy, like, go-to, this is what caused the end of the world. Which is interesting. Especially
since one of the like, kind of main plots, I say main, London itself, or the ancient city of London, kind of plays a big part, where it's just, like, buried under this swamp, and all of the rottingness of London and all of the bodies and all of the refuse and everything is just causing this incredibly caustic section of the future planet. And it references, like, the millions of bodies that are buried there and have been rotting for 1,000 years. And that struck me because it's completely the opposite of every other explanation that we were given. Like, every other explanation was just like people disappeared. And then you get to him describing London, and he's like, everyone just fell over dead in London, and their bodies are still there, and then they just decomposed, which is pretty odd.
Yeah, and then there's even a detail later where it's almost described like a Pompeii type event or something, where, like, everything is so completely superheated that like all of their building infrastructure basically becomes like salt. And, like it's very strange.
Y- Yeah, which I also don't know. Like, part of me was assuming a nuclear blast, and that would have like flash the opposite, whatever the opposite of flash frozen is. It would have flash heated everything. But then at the same time, what would 1,000 years do to a house? Because it was described as just being like like the walls had turned to salt, and if you touched it, then it would just completely dissolve in front of you. And there was a whole like nuclear radiation, type of fallout, but that also was described as just being a natural production of the decomposition of the city. And it never clicked with me that this was like literally before nuclear arms, which is
That's
also
the crazy thing, because it reads so legibly like that's what it is. It's very there's a lot that just kind of like rattles around as you try and like consider how to read this book now. And like maybe, the argument could be that like, chemical warfare still existed at the time. Like they had the precursor of like sarin gas and like napalm and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just it's a book that feels like kind of unstuck in time in some ways, where there's sections of it that read so contemporary, and then there's sections where like you have to read the same sentence 5 times, not because it's like dense or interesting, because it's so fucking dry. You're like, what is the important thing here? Like, why am I like there's so many times where the story feels like it's going, and then it stops to be like, and now I'm going to tell you about this grass or whatever. And I'm like, I'm like, Richard, I don't care. I seriously don't. I'm not interested. And it's relentless even to like the last paragraph of the book, right? Like I just really struggle with the actual act. Like I think it's great and like I like the ideas of it, but I really struggle with the actual reading of the book.
I guess I don't know if I really spoke about part 2, but when it got into part 2, I was very into it, because entire premise of this story is that after like current society is gone, then the wilderness is able to rise up again, and the forests spring up, and humanity goes back to this age when we were living with and in nature, and we were not like, industrialization wasn't even on anybody's minds, and it doesn't seem like anyone even wanted to work towards that. They might just stay in this era of knights and horses and stuff. And talking about, hollowing out his own canoe from a tree that he felled, and they make their own bows, and like all of their weapons are stuff that you have to practice, and it's sword play, and like this is the life that I wanted to live, and I was born in the wrong era. So like for that reason, like I loved the second part of it, especially when he's out and he's traveling by himself, and it like reminded me of like The Hatchet and The River and all those Gary Paulsons, where it's just the guy that's out with nature, and he's surviving and thriving and struggling against these natural things. Because very rarely is there ever any like human antagonist that he is against. It's
right.
much more his own like inner antagonisms.
Yeah, it's weird. Like his antagonism is like the caste system. I guess we'll get to it, but like, yeah, it's really a structural problem more than like an individual person problem. And you're right. Also, his shitty attitude keeps undoing him, especially the first kind of few sections we get of Felix. Here, let me read the summary, and then we can get into it. This is my attempt to summarize this book, which I should say too, for those who haven't read or don't read along, this is kind of, as James says, the first half of the book is very much a kind of ecological history of like the end of the world and then the rebuilding and stuff like that. And then the second half is really like kind of a picaresque style novel where each kind of few chapters, the protagonist is dealing with some new problem on this kind of quest for like self-actualization and status, and they're kind of not related at all. So it is kind of difficult to like totally summarize, but I've done my best. London has emptied. Thistle and moss cover the cities after several hundred centuries. Of the men, there are the transient bushmen, lawless savages who kill and steal with abandon. The slightly racially depicted Romani, frequently called gypsies, and then there's a bunch of stuff here about lakes and things like that. Also, there's a whole section about dogs and the type of dogs there are. Also, cows are mentioned. The actual story starts with Sir Felix, a bookish and lanky knight, and his brother Oliver. Where Oliver is a star athlete and brilliant warrior, Felix is awkward, stubborn, and intelligent. The only talent Felix possesses is with the bow, of which he greatly excels, but of which buys him very little status in this Saxony-type society. The three brothers are the sons of a disgraced nobleman. They each resent their father in equal measure, and their father is oblivious. Felix builds a canoe in secret, intending to set off on an adventure, and we think find his fortune elsewhere. He and Oliver visit the Baron for a 3-day event, during which Felix is ignored by literally everyone, especially the love of his life, Aurora. However, as we learn on the afternoon of the last day, when he and Aurora finally spend time alone, he realizes her love is true in return. And so Oliver rides back in the dark, almost gets crossbowed, and his horse is poisoned by a bushman. This has no impact on the story, it's a completely meaningless detail. A few days later, Felix sets off, realizing that this journey is in search of status, not for himself, but so that he and Aurora can be together in the caste society structure. He eventually comes to a city and heads off to find the king who is mustering a siege. He becomes a knave to a lordling and is scarred by the horrors of war. After a disastrous assault on the keep, he runs his mouth about the king being gluttonous and lazy. Felix is thus imprisoned. He is granted an audience with the king, and surprisingly, the king listens to Felix's suggestions. He even grants Felix clothing and a sword. This seems like he's on his way to becoming a knight. But Felix being Felix, he can't resist running his goddamn mouth, and he is eventually hounded out of camp and gains literally nothing from this exchange. I think in total summation, he loses his spear. So he kind of comes out of this one in net negative. Exhausted, Felix falls asleep in his canoe on the water, which feels like a bad idea. He eventually lands on the far-off side of the lake. He wanders through a blasted hellscape, shrouded in perpetual yellow vapor. Dazed and drugged, he realizes he stumbled onto the ashes of London. He picks up a bunch of crap, including a bracelet that he intends to give to Aurora, and heads back to his canoe, where he becomes famous with a tribe of shepherds for his bow prowess and his willingness/daringness to go into London. He stuns the tribe by fending off the gypsies and becomes their war leader. Now imbued with the prospect of future land and actual status, Felix heads home with designs on finally being with Aurora. And that's all we read for today. So I guess we should talk about the first half of the book, which I find so boring. Like, in a way that is almost inexcusable. Like, to the point where when I came back to read this, I was like, do I just skip to chapter 6? Will J.M. notice? But no, I forced myself to get through it. Yeah, so I guess there's really three kind of types of... we get three kind of types of guy, right? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on these. We get the Romani, which are kind of transient. They keep mostly to themselves. They're depicted in the same way that the Romani always are in fiction at the time. Very similar to how you see the Romani written in something like Peaky Blinders, for example. The Bushman stuff. So we get the Bushmen, who are like the savages who, are kind of depicted as like, they live, they're sort of like rejects of society. They'll come during the night, they'll steal your cattle, they'll like, hunt stuff and eat raw meat. Like, they're kind of like brutish savages. We get the Irish to the north, and then we get our kind of almost like Saxony style society that dominates most of England, which is this kind of a structure of kings and barons, like, to your point, very much going back to like Arthurian times, where you have like little townships that are run by barons, and then a collection of baronies are typically run by a king. And England has returned to a place like it was, during the Viking invasions, where there's sort of any number of kings in any given region. And obviously the lakes and the tributaries are kind of used as they were previously. to have warships and boats kind of moving merchandise and trades between places. So that's kind of the configuration of the world, I guess. Is there anything in particular that you want to grab onto in the first half here?
Ironically, like as far as the people, I had much less like I had much fewer thoughts about it than I had about the animals and the nature. Like I think I spent way more time trying to figure out where the lake was than I ever spent thinking about the different, like nationalities of these different people. And part of that might be because all of these different like subcultures that formed just are so natural to what we've seen throughout history that if we're like, okay, industrialization is gone and modernism is gone, then what would people do? And we already know, we've already lived through it. They would do the same thing that humans did, 2000 years ago or whatever. And so it never, like I was more confused about how every animal evolved into a white and a black form than I ever was thinking about like the people.
Can I tell you the number of times where I went, why do they keep coloring? And I was like, is this literal, or is this like a metaphor that I'm not understanding?
I do think the whites were generally the ones that were like the high value that you got like extreme prestige if you could kill a white bull or a white pig or whatever. But I don't know if that was consistent across all of them.
I don't know.
And I also kept thinking like that could maybe be a post-nuclear thing where things were like evolving in a way that they would not normally evolve.
That was my assumption.
But I don't I don't necessarily know we saw any evidence of that. I even have this like topographical map of like the area, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, like where would this lake be, and how is it all this like sweet water? Like, did all the icebergs melt, and where are these low-lying levels that the lake would have formed?
Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, the only place it could be is probably like River Medway, so like kind of to the east, like near Minster on the Sea. But again, that wouldn't be fresh water. So I don't know. I mean, you have to assume that like the other assumption that I sometimes see when people talk about this book is like that not being a nuclear apocalypse, but being some kind of like event that just London is completely destroyed as like a physical piece of land and becomes the islands and the various, it all just goes back to water at some, during this event. And that's kind of like, it all takes place in London Central. But again, I mean, it's not important specifically where it takes place, but that they seem to live almost, it's almost like a, it's almost pitched in its structuring principles as far as like the geography. The geography is almost pitched as kind of like, like a, I don't even know, like a North American kind of like tropical collection of islands and stuff. It's very weird.
It's kind of like maybe like one of the Great Lakes in America, and just every civilization, all of these people have just like formed a circle around the lake, and they just don't, but they also don't have the means to really travel far enough to communicate with people further away. There were some references to like early in the before time when they could still communicate across the ocean and like what they were doing over there, and but those references were only like, yeah, it's the same over here, people just disappeared and we don't know why. We don't really have any other references to all of these like kind of like global changes. But the lake is such a huge portion of it as well, and with London being like sea locked, it also kept, I was like, but they also talk about the sea as being its own separate thing as well. So the whole geography thing, like, At the time when I was reading, I didn't let myself get like overly concerned about it. I was just like, okay, they're at a lake or around a lake. It's freshwater. The ocean is somewhere. That's their starting map. You're in. This is the first season of Destiny. Don't worry about the rest of the map yet. All we have is the landing point.
Yeah. It's book one. Don't even worry about the fact that like there'll be inconsistent details later. But yeah, I mean, I'll give you the opening of the book because I think it's, if you're not reading along, it's important to understand the tone of how this first section is written, because it starts off and you go, oh wow, and then after about 5 pages you're like, oh, this is the tone. We're not.
Is dry a tone?
Oh god, it's crazy. Okay, this is the opening 2 paragraphs. And again, you start, you go, ooh. The old men say their fathers told them that soon after the fields were left to themselves, a change began to be visible. It became green everywhere in the first spring after London ended, so that all the country looked alike. The meadows were green, and so was the rising wheat which had been sown, but which neither had nor would receive any further care. Such arable fields as had not been sown, but where the last stubble had been ploughed up were overrun with couch grass, and where the short stubble had not been ploughed, the weeds hid it, so that there was no place which was not more or less green. The footpaths were the greenest of all, for such is the nature of grass where it had once been trodden on. And by, as the summer came on, the former roads were thinly covered with the grass that had spread out from the margin. And then it just like goes on and on and on from there. And yeah, you start by, there's a paragraph I had circled later where, by the 30th year, there was not one single open place, the hills only excepted, where a man could walk, unless he followed the tracks of wild creatures or cut himself a path. The ditches, of course, had long since become full of leaves and dead branches, so that the water which should have run off down them stagnated, and presently spread out in the hollow places and by the corner of what had once been fields, forming marshes where the horsetail flags and sedges hid the water. So my understanding of the lake, then, is that over the 1,000-year period of time, because none of the usual drainage that should be happening in the city is happening, that's how the lake forms. Is that all of these like runoffs are blocked and all of these brooks are blocked, and it just like is a naturally occurring lake kind of thing, I guess.
And the opposite, where all of the dams that humans had built were destroyed, and so all of the man-made lakes were let go, and they flowed to the natural low points and formed new lakes that never existed before.
Oh. That's probably the most likely way that you could square the circle on like where this is like the reservoirs kind of becoming their own like freshwater lakes. But yeah, it goes on from there. It's also, it's just a lot.
Because the book opened on London, I wanted to go on and point out how weird that I thought that the entire premise seemed to be talking about London. Like the book's called after London, it opens talking about London, and then in the third act he goes to London, but the book is not at all about London, and it's not technically about after London either. And so like the entire reason that he structured it so much around the city when it's not structured around the city just ended up feeling really weird to me.
Well, I think that's because it is like a picaresque kind of story, which if this is your first sort of dip in here, and you haven't heard me use that term before, so like the picaresque is usually a story that is like focused on like a low status character. There's usually very little plot, and you just kind of get like a series of like adventures or kind of like episodic things. There's the saying of like once a picaro, always a picaro, like, your circumstances might change, but ultimately, you're the kind of guy you've always been. And they tend to focus a lot on realism. And so I think some of what's happening here is like at a kind of structuring level, Jefferies is inventing a new genre of like he's inventing a new kind of science fiction genre in this story, right? Like he's inventing the post-apocalypse story in its kind of summation, but at the same time, he's placing that within the narrative structure of a picaresque. And so this thing that should be important to us, right? Which, because like if this book was written today, for example, right? it would be literally like, I mean, the equivalent of this would be something like a Hunger Games, where that's all taking place in North America, and you can do the work to figure out where each district is located in relation to the current geography of North America, right? And that's like a structuring principle of the story. Whereas this, it's weird because I think the thing that Picaresque does for this narrative is it makes it such that it could be any city. The fact that it's London is kind of irrelevant. It just makes for a catchy book title, maybe. I'm not, yeah, I don't know.
Well, so like throughout the book, Felix, the main character, is like constantly having these struggles with like life shouldn't be this way. It was so much better in the before times when humans were more civilized. And so like it feels like the book actually should have been titled like After Civilization Ends or something, because that's what it's about. It's not about London, proper noun.
Right, but it's about England proper noun. If you know what I mean.
The and then the point about writing structure was also interesting, because I had the thought when you mentioned the horse that was poisoned, like in a modern story, that would be the inciting incident, because he was struggling with leaving on this journey and he was going to say goodbye to Aurora, but I could easily see where he just does not go on this trip because he just had this, like, she's being so kind to him at the very end before they part ways. And then if that horse had not been poisoned, I think he could have talked himself out of it. But because the horse getting poisoned was basically him almost dying, because if that knife or arrow or whatever had just missed the horse and hit his leg instead, then he would have died. So he's like, oh, I have to go on this trip because that was almost the end of me. And it was, complete accident. I have to go and do this now. But the book didn't frame it that way because writing wasn't, approached in that fashion.
Well, I guess it was. It just, this isn't doing that, right? Like the modern novel. Let me quickly check some dates so I don't say something incorrect here. Doing a quick real time fact check here. When was?
That's also me assuming that writing was not approached in that fashion. That was a big assumption on my part, and you are here to correct me.
Yeah. So what's this?
As is your want.
Is this the same year as Madame Bovary? This is a year before. Okay, so you're not too far off being wrong. Madame Bovary is the following year, which is largely considered like the first contemporary novel, but certainly the structured drama novel exists in the way that we think about it, which is like, yeah, as you say, like that would have been the inciting incident. I think this is deliberately not doing that. It's deliberately being a bit more in the kind of picaresque style. Yeah, so like you're partly right in the sense that like, yes, this was a more common type of story, right? This kind of adventure style serial of a collection of episodic events. Like the classic one is like Don Quixote. But that's obviously the big touch point that a lot of people have in that genre. But I guess do we even need the first half of the book? Is a question that I wanted to ask you. Like, if you just cut off essentially everything but the opening couple of paragraphs, and then you just went straight to the start of Felix's story, would you lose anything in doing that? Or do you think that, like, there are elements of... Because I guess the reason I ask that is in a modern novel, all the information that we get in that world-building section, so like 1 through 6, or 1 through the first half of 6, that would be world building you would pick up on throughout the book. Like that would be implied and like subtext and like worked into the story, right? So yeah, I guess like, do we need this opening half at all? Is a question.
I think the answer is yes, but where that stuff occurs in the story, like you just said, it in modern stuff, all of that information would occur later. Like when Felix goes and visits the lake, everything that's written in part 1, chapter 5 would be moved to there, which is chapter 13 or so, is when he goes and sails away out on the lake. So So all of chapter 5 would be moved into chapter 13, and all of the information is still there. And the same thing, chapter 4 is all the the different types of people that exist in the and chapter 3, the men of the woods. So like all of that information would just be moved to whenever they encounter a shepherd, then you insert all of that information about what the shepherds are, blah blah blah. But I could also see, just from this is how this writer's mind works, is that he wants to organize all of his information up front and give you the information so you have your world building before you actually get into the world, and now you have that background and whatever like glossary terms that you need to understand, and now you could get into the characters. So it's very much someone like me who's like so linear, that's like this has to come first or they won't understand what the lake is. Um I'm outing myself, but also saying like I don't know if I would have done that, but
No, that's kind of how I feel about it too. Like it's just a really hard circle to kind of square, because like it also feels necessary in order to kind of, quote unquote invent this genre, right? Like it feels like Jefferies sat down and had to go through the exercise of like, okay, if people disappeared tomorrow, what would happen in what order? And then he starts to like pepper in various, like it almost feels like the exercise in real time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the other thought I had that would make a lot of sense is I intended to look up what his background was, because I could very much see that part one is that was the book, and then he showed it to people and they were like, oh, this is a great start. You should put some characters in here and put in some story. And he was like, well, I wasn't really doing that, but yeah, sure, I could do that. It feels like it's so separate that and everything was so intentional, and that there was kind of more interest paid to all of the botany and the animals and all this stuff. There's like more interest paid to that, it felt, than to the people.
Oh yeah, I mean he was a nature writer by trade, so like, yeah, his interest was in the plants and the animals far more so than like the characters.
Yeah. So I could totally see he does like part one for like his his doctoral thesis, and
then someone says,
is like, that's
hey,
really good.
Yeah. Hey Dick, you are gonna need to write no one gives a shit. You need to put a character in here, buddy. Yeah, you could see him at the pub in 1850, and his buddy's like, listen, Dickie, you gotta put a guy in there. No one's just gonna read about. No one cares that apparently one type of sheep tastes like thyme because they eat a lot of thyme, pal. Like, what are you doing, Richard? Come on, man.
And to get people interested, he put in the most like awkward pre-incel type of character possible.
Oh, it's awesome. Dude, we'll get to Felix. He's so vile. I love him so much. Well, one thing I do like though is these. So yeah, the main descriptions are quite slow. Like, there were deer, red and fallow, in numerous packs and chases. You could also see this in like a like a David Attenborough type narration. There were deer, red and fallow, in numerous packs. Like it's got a very slow cadence to it. But then by comparison, there are certain sections where it feels very, very like contemporary. This is the bit I really like. I think this is the end of 2. It is the beaver whose dams are now occasionally found upon the streams by those who traverse the woods. Some of the aquatic birds too, which frequent the lakes, are thought to have been originally derived from those that were formerly kept as curiosities. In the castle yard at Longtover may still be seen the bones of an elephant, which was found dying in the woods near that spot. And it just, like, there's no explanation of why there's an elephant. And I just love details like that, where it's like, it creates such an anachronistic sense to this world that could, I think, feel... I think without the specific details like that, it could feel quite homogenous and even more dull than it is.
That may be the section where he was talking about the different species of animals that had been kept in zoos and had escaped from zoos, and how some of them had gone on to evolve into whatever. And then also there was just like a random elephant somewhere.
Yeah.
It could have been that, but that also triggered the thought that, like, if this were a modern day story, like, what's the Will Smith I Am Legend, like you might see there's all those flashbacks and stuff. So you'd see like people like on their phones and all of the frantic pace of modern society, and then it cuts to the future, and nothing is moving, everything is still, and he's just like sharpening a knife, and there's no movement, there's no rush, everything is slow, and that's what the beginning of this feels like. And if this were like a modern novel, it would feel like he did this intentionally, because he's like, the rush no longer exists. You don't have to worry about, checking all of your different social medias and stuff, because now you just have the deer pounding across the grass fields, and it's like intentionally written in that fashion. But I don't know, he would have had the forethought to do this, so to write it that way so long ago.
I mean, I could kind of see that. Station 11 does that maneuver that you're describing, right? Like, that show has the literal scene where you're in, you cut between like the theater performance and then the theater where it's completely overgrown. Like, there's multiple instances in that show where you get that kind of contrast. But yeah, I think, 100%, like the modern version of this. Well, I guess the modern version of this is Station 11, to be fair. Like, that book is doing the same thing. But yeah, we get that constant cut back and forth. Like, there's that quote. I wonder if I still have it. Hold on. Let me Control F my notes. It should still be in here. Yeah, no more internet. Hang on, here we go. Fuck, this is long. An incomplete list. No more diving into pools of chlorinated water lit green from below. No more ball games played out under floodlights. No more porch lights with moths fluttering on summer nights. No more trains running under the surface of cities on the dazzling power of the electric third rail. No more cities. No more films, except rarely, except with a generator drowning out half the dialogue, and only then for the first little while, until the fuel for the generators ran out, because automobile gas goes stale after 2 or 3 years. Aviation gas lasts longer, but it was difficult to come by. No more screens shining in the half-light, as people raised their phones above the crowd to take pictures of concert stages. No more concert stages lit by candy-colored halogens. No more electronica, punk, electric guitars. No more pharmaceuticals. No more certainty of surviving a scratch on one's hand, a cut on a finger while chopping vegetables for dinner, a dog bite. No more flight. No more towns glimpsed from the sky through airplane windows, points of glimmering light. No more looking down from 30,000 feet and imagining the lives lit up by those lights at that moment. No more airplanes. No more requests to put your tray table in its upright and locked position. But no, that wasn't true. There were still airplanes here and there. They stood dormant on runways and in hangars. They collected snow on their wings. In the cold months, they were ideal for food storage. In summer, the ones near the orchards were filled with trays of fruit that dehydrated in the heat. Teenagers snuck into them to have sex. Rust blossomed and streaked. No more countries, all borders unmanned. No more fire departments, no more police. No more road maintenance or garbage pickups. No more spacecraft rising up from Cape Canaveral, from the Bangkok Cosmodrome, from Vandenberg, Plestek, to Nashima, burning paths through the atmosphere into space. No more internet. No more social media. No more scrolling through litanies of dreams and nervous hopes and photographs of lunches, cries for help, and expressions of contentment, and relationship status updates with heart icons whole or broken, plans to meet up later, pleas, complaints, desires, pictures of babies dressed as bears or peppers for Halloween. No more reading and commenting on the lives of others, and in doing so, feeling slightly less alone in the room. No more avatars. And Mandel does the exact maneuver you're describing of producing the literal contrast in the prose itself between like the contemporary rush of everything and then the absence of it. Yeah, so 100%. I think you're 100% onto it. Yeah.
I also just had the interesting thought that he wrote this story in the time before anything that was modern would have been built that might still have existed, like like all of our concrete stadiums, like they would still be around, barring the nuclear aspect. And like there's probably some form of like current technology that didn't exist when he wrote this that might still be able to exist in the future, because like all he talks about really is like glass window panes and some like pieces of jewelry and stuff like that. But you have to wonder if what else, if he had written the book later, might have existed in this world. And then I went on and I was like, the pyramids would still be there, like relatively unchanged, right? And isn't that a really fascinating? I don't know that we've ever seen that in any post-apocalyptic stuff that I've looked at. When you go back and you look at really ancient stuff and how it's already been here for thousands of years, and thousands of years in the future, it'll still be there unchanged if we're not stupid and we don't blow it up.
I mean, to be fair to London, I do feel like, just based on some pictures I'm looking at, it was pretty much how you imagine London now. Like a lot of stone, like obviously if you take out the glass and stuff, like they were building cathedrals and big stonework shit. Like I feel like a lot of infrastructure would have lasted if it hadn't been like, essentially like atomized. But yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Because that was the other thing. Like, isn't a bunch of the stuff over there, the old churches and the castles and like all this stuff, like, isn't it already 1,000 years old? Mm-hmm. And it's still standing?
Well, but then what's interesting is like, A, was London completely razed? We don't know. But B, if it wasn't, how would any of that be indistinguishable after 1,000 years? Like, wouldn't that stuff just like get buried under like vegetation and like shifting soil? Like, like how much of that would even be identifiable as buildings? Or is that just, part of like a mountain now, or part of like a hill, or, buried in a valley? Like, I think that's like a really interesting aspect to this is, yeah, you're right. It's not like, like Felix doesn't like come upon like an ancient church or cathedral, or like a, like, because that's what would happen in a modern story, I feel.
Well, walk that back slightly, because I'm pretty sure that that the house of Aquila, would like Felix's house, like where his parents live, that is an ancient castle of the before time.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure.
I completely missed that.
Because like they talked about like the construction of it was like something that they didn't know how to do anymore, and it may have been Aurora's castle as well, because they have to like they have to extend the banquet hall outside by building additional structure, because the ancients who built it didn't build it big enough. So I think like the more wealthy you are, you can afford those things that still existed in the before time, which may have been castles that are currently, already centuries old.
Well, yeah, because I kind of read Aurora's place is basically like a church or something. Like it has church structuring vibes.
It's got church energy to it.
It's got church energy, dude. Well, yeah, because they have that big glass facade that they maintain. That's like a sign of their wealth. Yeah, and I like. Yeah,
it may have been at her house where they were describing the glass pane in the window, which was the sign of the wealth. Mm-hmm. But what I found so interesting was that it was like everyone was afraid to clean the glass. A, because they were worried they would break it, and B, no one really knew how to clean the glass.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And so you couldn't see through it anymore, and it was just like this grimy, dirty yellow, and it was still the most like prized possession, even though it was the ugliest thing I could imagine to look at from our standards.
Yeah, I love that as like a framing. Okay, we'll get to Felix in a sec. Is there anything in the first half that you want to touch on? Any of the animal stuff that you wanted to bring forward?
No, the colors were one thing, and I guess I did really like that, like every species was evolving into a black, a white, and then usually there was like a third one that was like the other.
Yeah, I love that. I did love like what he's some other. It's not consistent at all. It's just like, I don't know, some other guy.
Yeah. But what he did that was so realistic was that each of these species he was describing like the ecology of where it was evolving, so that it kind of made sense that like these pigs that were evolving in this way was because they were in these low hill areas with all of these briars or whatever. And so like a bunch of it made a lot of sense because of how he was going into this part one, even though it was like I had messaged David while we were reading this first part, and I said this is the least, what did I say, like this is the least fictional fiction I've ever read, or something like that, because like there's no story to the beginning. It's just like reading an encyclopedia. It's literally like an encyclopedia entry. It was very weird.
Yeah, it does really read like that. And like I think that's partly because he's a nature writer, but also this is the thing I can't get behind. Could you imagine picking this up in 1850? This would be wild. No one's ever really done anything like this before. I reckon this would be edge of your seat stuff if you read this at the time. Like the notion of like you're in London, like imagine, if you will, you're in London, right? You're sitting at a cafe by the Thames, and you're reading this book about the all of England 1,000 years in the future, going back to barbarism. Like, I reckon this would be. It's boring to us because of the way, or it's not boring. You know what I mean? We struggle with it because of the prose style and because it's not particularly the way that a contemporary story would do it. But I do think this would be like, I think this would be pretty like, attention grabbing at the time and pretty exciting at the time. Especially because, to your point that you made earlier, none of the markers and identifiable characteristics that would indicate that civilization ever existed are here, right? We don't really get the indication that some of this infrastructure survived until we get to part 2. Like this whole first section is just like everything goes back to to nature. Yeah, I don't know.
One interesting thing about so you had mentioned people at the time and how they would have reacted to this story, and then I kind of thought that it's a kind of a trope in movies or stories that the kid will be going to bed and they'll be like, Papa, tell me a story, and then the parent makes up a story, and like that's a trope, but it's also real. That's been going on for like all of human history. Parents have been making up stories to tell their kids. So like on the one hand, yes, this might have been like the first time that this type of story was ever penned to paper, but at some point in the past, however many thousands of years, some parent has told a story like this to their kid, which is really interesting to think about. Like this is not the first time that a post-apocalypse story like this has been told in human history, but we don't have record of all the stories that were told. They've just only existed for a few people, so like one kid alone, like in their little hut, was like terrified. They're like, oh, the world's gonna end one day.
Well, it's funny you say that because Jefferies was also a children's book writer, so you're kind of I don't know, man. You're picking off some pretty impressive guesswork today. But yeah, one of the things I just wanted to call out with the lake specifically is just on that question of like where this is in the geography and stuff. The end of part 1 is this little section here. Beneath the surface of the lake, there must be concealed very many ancient towns and cities, of which the names are lost. Sometimes the anchors bring up even now fragments of rusty iron and old metal or black beams of timber. It is said with probability that when the remnant of the ancients found the water gradually encroaching, for it rose very slowly, as they were driven back year by year, they considered that in time they would all be swept away and drowned. But after extending to its present limits, the lake rose no farther, not even in the wettest seasons, but always remained the same. From the position of certain keys, we know that it has thus remained for the last 100 years at least. Never, as I observed before, was there so beautiful and expansive water. How much must we sorrow that that is so often proved only the easiest mode of bringing the miseries of war to the doors of the unoffending. Yet men are never weary of sailing to and fro upon it, and most of the cities of the present time are upon its shore. And in the evening we walk by the beach, and from the rising grounds look over the waters, as if to gaze upon their loveliness were reward for us for the labor of the day. And so that's kind of my evidence, I guess, that maybe this lake is on top of London, potentially. Potentially.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the descriptions of how many miles that they travel, because there's actually some pretty good like, I think you could probably make a pretty good map based off of the descriptions in the book and stuff. But from like looking at my topography map that I had pulled up, I kept thinking like this entire story was taking place with like London being the total outskirt that is only barely part of it, and like most of it is like in this land structure that used to be like Italy and Germany and France, and the whole thing is way different looking than it used to be. But there's all of these lakes and lower lying areas, and then all of these mountains that used to be like above Italy would be the islands that are now in the middle of the lake.
Oh.
That formed when all of the dams and stuff broke, and then you keep going, and then you get from the edge of the lake to the sea, which is really close, and then London is also on the outskirts of this lake, which anyway, I don't know. I feel like this is something I could go really hard in and like make my own maps and like, what are the boundaries of this lake look like? And then I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all.
I know, because then I'm going to find a quote by Jefferies being like, yeah, I didn't really think about where I put it. I just like, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of part one, I guess. It's a lot of detail that is ultimately superfluous. I do think the most important stuff is the lake. The concept of like status and the caste system that we kind of get a little bit described, and then probably the types of antagonists, right? So like the Bushmen, the Irish, and then the gypsies.
Yeah, as far as, I mean, I did say that I didn't think there was much interesting about the people, but the one like really interesting thing about the entire society for the most part has devolved back into like the era of knights, and like chivalry is really important, but then also like you will have slaves, and that is extremely normal. And also like capitalism is a huge thing, and people are getting like tricked into total slavery for their entire life just because they said the wrong thing to the wrong person, and
it's crazy,
like, all this kind of stuff. And it's so much of it I'm like, this could be a modern thing, like so much of this could be a modern thing. But then like the knights and the chivalry and the swords and everything was like kind of the main point, because that's what Felix kept wanting to do. He was like, I can't marry the girl because I'm not rich enough, is not the right, I don't have enough prestige. I have to get in somebody's court, and I have to rise up enough in one of these king's courts to be a great enough knight or whatever so that I can marry the princess. And I'm like, it feels like a lot of stories that are, I don't know if post-apocalypse is the right phrase, but like so many things where society ends seem to go back to this idea where it's like the base level of society is men on horses with swords fighting over the princess. That seems like the most natural thing ever, which is just really weird, because it could be like shepherds and farming. Like that should be really, really natural. But no, it's like we have to be on horses with swords, and we have to be really, really about nobility and honoring our word and this kind of stuff. Like that is such a strong point of the story. And if I went and researched a bunch of other like sci-fi fantasy stuff, it feels like that would be that would be a really consistent theme that you saw. Whether it's Lord of the Rings or House Stark or whatever. It's like that's such a huge part of it. But the knights and the swords are the foundation, and you got to do it all to get the right princess.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, is that all humanity is? Is that,
well,
if we keep repeating this apocalypse every 5,000 years, are we every time going back to knights on horses,
Yeah, I mean, I think Jefferies demonstrates perhaps a bit of a lack of imagination insofar as like what cultural barbarism will produce in this context. But I think critically, the thing that makes this possible and the thing that reinforces this like system throughout the history of his particular version of the post-apocalypse is that the nobles stay noble by like protecting intelligence and the ability to read. Like there's kind of a through line from the way that like capital structures society in modernity at the time through to like how the like it kind of, he does like a really interesting like kind of horseshoe thing of going like, yeah, like rich people like have it really well off, and they try and make sure that there are people that have it less well off than them, and that just sort of follows all the way through, and then goes, okay, now it's going to reassert itself as the class system of like the kind of Arthuriana style, yeah, the thing that you're seeing, which is like knights and nobility and honor and stuff like that. But that's also part of what makes this such a charming character to follow, because he's none of those things. Felix is not particularly noble. He's not very charming. He's not even very good at like riding on a horse or fighting with a sword. He's good at shooting arrows, and everyone thinks that's really lame, and no one gives a shit because he can't joust and he can't fight with a sword. He doesn't even own a sword because he's so bad at fighting with a sword. It's great. He's such an interesting choice in this context.
Yeah. And I'm really curious about his brother has a sword that has been passed down through their family for generations, and it was a sword made by the ancients. And I like, we're not really making swords today aside from like hobbyists, right? So is he talking about a really ancient sword that we would consider ancient now? Did he find like a King Arthur sword and it's still around at this point?
I thought, and this is only because I like am familiar with the UK and I'm part British, but like I just kind of assumed it might have been like a dress sword or something like that, because those would have been around in the 1850s. That had been my assumption. It could be a knight sword, but my assumption was.
I don't think that those are made whatsoever for actual functionality. And I would assume that in this context, everything has to be extremely functional. And the fact that they were like, oh, this sword is amazing, it was made in the before time, meant that it would like cut through a tree, And I don't know that dress swords do that, but I also have no authority whatsoever.
I was going to say, we're
aside
not.
from,
Yeah.
I mean, I have a katana and it's right there, but that's the extent of my...
If you're a sword person, write in, let us know. But yeah, I like... So yeah, we get Felix and Oliver, who are like the two brothers that still live with their father. And I love... So yeah, Oliver is like good with the lance, he's good with the sword, he's like the popular... He's like athletic, and he's really, really talented. But because their father is this kind of like disgraced nobleman, they won't give him like a regiment to command. So everyone is impressed by him, but he has no status as a result. And like Felix is in a similar position where he just has nothing going for him that is going to give him status. And they're both endlessly annoyed at their dad. And this results in like, I love the way it manifests, where they just end up biting each other's head off constantly because they're annoyed at their father and they're also annoyed at each other. It's such a cool dynamic. And it leads to some really entertaining exchanges later on with the canoe as well.
But it's also deeper than that, because it's they were intentionally written as polar opposites to really nail down how odd Felix is, um, because the guy who's courting Aurora later on is another one of these who is the manly man who can do everything, and he and the brother get along fantastic because it's the two manly men who are doing their stuff together. But Felix is just like, I want to talk about the trebuchets, and I want to talk about the old books, and like
Oh
no
my
one wants
God.
that. So
Yeah, he's
so
such
that's
a
why the two brothers are written to clash like this, right?
It's so fun. Just to pull on the sword thing, I actually had marked down the description of the sword, and I think you were right. By his bedhead hung his sword, his most valued and most valuable possession. It was one which had escaped the dispersion of the ancients. It had been ancient even in their days, and of far better work than they themselves produced. Broad, long, straight, and well balanced, it appeared capable of cutting through helmet and mail when wielded by Oliver's sturdy arm. Such a sword could not have been purchased for money. Money indeed had often been offered for it in vain. Persuasion and even covert threats from those higher in authority who coveted it were alike wasted. The sword had been in the family for generations, and when the Baron grew too old, or rather when he turned away from active life, the second son claimed it as the fittest to use it. The claim was tacitly allowed. At all events, he had it and meant to keep it. So yeah, I think it was like a proper like knight sword, which like there are shitloads of those in the UK. Like even in Italy, we were the place we were staying in Rome. Like I was, I don't know if I told you this at the time, but we were staying in this place in like central Rome, and in the lobby of the building we were staying in, there was a combined, and this is going to be an odd two things to combine. There was a combined like medieval like replica store where you could buy like knight armor and knight swords and also Harry Potter merchandise for some reason. It was very strange. So there was a cutout of Harry Potter in the lobby of the building we were staying in advertising this store. It was fucking weird, man.
You know what is really interesting though is that that might make so much sense to this story, because any really like old castle in modern time that is being kept up would probably be some type of like museum where it's being actively used for something. So if you're keeping up your castle, then you're bringing in your old swords and armor and like all this stuff. So that's how this family got the sword in the first place. Is their family in, centuries ago, they came upon this castle which had all of these old relics of the before time,
Right.
which in modern day was just a castle that was a museum. And so they
Yes.
they took the sword, they took the castle, they repurposed everything, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Another structuring principle. Okay. So Felix he's building a canoe. But another structuring principle that is important to understand is that much like in actual like knightdom, like during the Saxon times, also facial hair plays a really important role here. In the funniest way. So I have this on. This is 56 on my version of the EPUB. This is describing Oliver. All the blood and bone and thew and sinew of the house seemed to have fallen to his share. All the fiery, restless spirit and defiant temper. All the utter recklessness and warrior's instinct. He stood every inch a man, with dark, curling, short-cut hair, brown cheek and Roman chin, trimmed mustache, brown eye, shaded by long eyelashes and well-marked brows. Every inch a natural king of men. That very physical preponderance and animal beauty was perhaps his bane, for his comrades were so many, and his love adventures so innumerable, that they left him no time for serious ambition. Between the brothers, there was the strangest mix of affection and repulsion. And then it goes on to be like, they were friends, but they really didn't get along. But the mustache makes its first mention here. And comes back in a huge way later, in a way that I was just like, what? Wild.
And I kind of went back and forth in my head about which way would be more quote unquote like realistic, because the slaves had to be kept clean shaven in this world, and that was the mark of the slave. And if you had a beard, you were a noble. And so if you had a beard like David's, you would be the most noble,
King
and then
of
I would
the-
only be like I'd only be like slightly noble. There's
Yeah.
a little beard. But then I was like, having something to shave
Yep.
to shave with,
Yep.
having a knife that was sharp enough to do it safely, and having to do that every single day, like that would be a sign of someone who was wealthy. So if you were a slave, you probably couldn't shave every day. So the slaves should have the beards, and the clean-shaven people should be the
Yeah.
rich people.
I had that same thought, and then I just went, whatever. I did legitimately have that same thought where I was like, wait, how are they shaving?
That's awesome. That's awesome. We both had this like cinema sins. Like,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
And then I went, I guess people did shave before like electric razors and disposable razors. So I guess, sure. Like, yeah, I don't know. I did have that thought. But so, okay. Yeah, Oliver's the sporty one. Felix is the like nerdy one. And Felix is building this canoe because he has designs of like setting off on an adventure in the vain hope that he might like find status, or like he's just kind of stuck, and he's like picked this as like a thing that's going to get him unstuck potentially, because he's in love with Aurora, who is another baron's daughter, but he is a nobody, and like to the point where like she's not even really allowed to acknowledge that he exists at this event, and that he just has this like the fact that they love each other is like slowly poisoning him because he can't like do anything about it.
But the whole relationship is also the most like stupid poisoned capitalist thing ever, because these two families are hearth something.
I didn't mark it down.
So like there's a term that was invented that means like these two families are so interconnected. I mean they live like miles apart, but it was like there was even a line that says something like, if a king is visiting your castle but your hearth brother is there, the king has to sleep outside on the ground because your hearth brother takes precedent, right? So these two families are so close that even a king cannot come between them. And yet the reason that this guy and girl can't be together is because whoever her dad owes debts to is like, you can't marry that one, we want you to marry someone better.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not making that up, right?
No, yeah, legit. Well, yeah, because that's why she's talking to that other guy the whole time, because he's like got proper status.
Yeah. So like they could legitimately, the two families are like equal. They could be together, and there's only like, I want to say like only a paragraph or two devoted to it, like how important women are in this society. Like it says like they are actually the ones who are taught to read, and they are the intellectual ones.
Yeah. Who
do all of the like, they do the work behind the scenes in running the kingdom. And it's kind of just like glossed over, and I was like, well, that's really interesting, because it makes a lot of sense that they still are in a place where like you have to fight for the princess because they are like the ultimate prize to be won or whatever, because that's historically something but you did not have women running everything. That seems to be an entirely new thing that this author invented. And I was like, well, that was way too interesting to just, gloss over in a paragraph or two. But like with that bit of information, if she's running or helping her mom run the entire castle over here, and they're telling her, oh, you can't marry the guy you want to marry, even though it's your hearth brother and we have this great connection with their family, like the whole thing, I'm just like, nah, you guys could work this out.
Yeah, probably. But then to be fair, it's her mom that forbids it, right? Like, it's the Baroness, and to your point, she's in charge.
I thought she was actually fine, because she sent Felix like a special china cup during the meeting, because she was like feeling sorry for him when he went up for tea and biscuits or whatever, and that was like the biggest thing ever for her A, send something to him, and then B, send it in like China, which doesn't exist anymore. It was like the biggest compliment that you could give anyone, and she did it for him because she likes him and felt sorry for him. So I thought it was entirely the dad who was having the pressure put on him by his debtors and stuff. I could be wrong.
I didn't mark down specifically, like, yeah, who is stopping the ruling. But I mean, the point is, like, it's a structural issue, right? You're right, they could probably figure it out, but then we wouldn't have a story. So I'm fine with it.
Well, I guess the reason that it's so interesting is because, like, the reason that Felix is doing it is not the reason that is not the actual reason that they're being kept apart. Does that make sense? Like, it's like, even if he got in good with a different king or whatever, the problem is the debtors putting pressure on the dad. So he couldn't necessarily negate that.
Well,
right?
I think that he could, because if he had status and wealth and things like that, like, because status is equated to wealth, like status produces wealth in this kind of society. So I think he probably could. I think if he came back and he had land and he had resources, that might solve the problem, or at least that's how the book frames it. Whether that actually is the case or not, I couldn't tell you, but.
And the other kind of weird thing about the entire thought process here is that people in this world, for the most part, can survive anywhere. And it's like never once does the thought occur to him to just go and get Aurora and get on a horse and go out into the wilderness and build a home and have a little farm and just be away from everyone and just be together out there, because he could do it. He could totally do it. He's not the greatest, but he could build his own, and he could hunt. He could do absolutely everything. Because
he hasn't had his adventure yet. He hasn't been able to break out of the framework of the society he lives within. Because that is ultimately how the book ends, is he does do that. Like, that's his plan.
But not, I will push back, because he is not doing what I described. He is rebuilding the society that he expected. He is going to build castles. He's going to rebuild, like, his version of knights. He's just doing it all within the framework of, like, shepherding. Mm-hmm. He's not just like, I will live the life of a shepherd and she will come live with me. He's like, no, I will build something grand that is deserving of having her here. Because he's so stuck in that romanticized mindset of what, the woman needs to have in order to be happy.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying. Well, yeah, because, like, capital dominates subjectivity, right? We come back to this thing of, like, it's behind your ability to conceive of reality. Like, the caste system and the money and the wealth and the nobility and stuff like that, it's so completely dominating his ability to perceive the world that he literally cannot think beyond that as a structuring principle, right? Because, yeah, you're right. The thing he should do is be like, fuck money, fuck all this, we're going to go have a farm, we're going to be happy. But it's like, no, that he's incapable of thinking that.
Which is, like, the reason that is so bad is because after she spends the whole party, like, ignoring him because she was instructed to, her, like, servant sneaks him in so that they could have, like, a private talk together, and she's basically like, you have my entire heart, and it's like the most beautiful, like, speech ever, and it's like the most loving thing, and I'm like, bro, just listen to what she's saying. But he spends the whole time like, I'm not good enough for this, I'm not good enough for her, and I'm like, oh, I hate everything. She's telling you that you could just take her and go off and you will be happy together. She's like, you're all that I want, and
he does. In Felix's
so frustrating.
In Felix's defense, he does spend 3 days being ignored by literally everyone, with the exception of the tea thing by the Baroness. And I love the way he just stews the whole time.
It's
awesome.
I will not, as an introvert who is very bad at socializing, mm-hmm. even I will not defend him, because he is at this party and he's just sitting here. He's going like this.
He makes no effort.
And he's like, he does not eat any food at a party because
so
he's
funny.
He does it to himself is the point that I'm making.
100%.
And so I don't want to defend that.
But I think that's the point. Like, you're supposed to read him and be like, God, Felix, get out of your own goddamn way. And it takes the question mark horrors of London to change. I don't know. We'll talk about what changes in, but the other thing, so we get this big 3-day event. We learn fun stuff like the fact that they still do tea, but there hasn't been any tea in like 100 years.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really funny.
No one remembers what tea is.
Yeah, no one knows what tea is. And like this kind of, you get the 3-day event where you start to unfold a bit of like what the different social structures are that kind of govern how this works. And also that, you know, at one point he sort of goes, oh, there's like, people talk about, you know, monsters and stuff, and that's ridiculous. But then, but then he goes, oh, but like, actually, there are demons out there, and people use amulets of like St. Augustine to ward against them. And he just like full-throatedly is like, oh no, like there were demons. Like, there's no monsters. That's ridiculous. But obviously, there's demons. You know, demons there were too of the streams, and demons dwelling in the midst of the hills. Demons that could travel only in the moonbeams, and others that floated before the stormy winds and hurled the wretched wanderer to destruction, or crushed him with the overthrown trees. In proof of this, the monk asked the reader if he had not heard of huge boughs falling from trees without visible cause, suddenly and without warning, and even of trees themselves in full foliage in calm weather, toppling with a crash, to the imminent danger or the death of those who happened to be passing. Let all these purchase the amulets of St. Augustine, concluded the writer, who it appeared was a monk in whose monastery the escaped prisoner had taken refuge, and who had written down his relation and copied his rude sketches. And like, so, and this is great. So Felix goes to his room, and this little piece of like parchment has been left by Aurora for him to read. And it doesn't even occur to him that's what she's done. He's just like, fuck him, whatever. This is here, I guess. And he just fully believes it. I love that detail of like bringing St. Augustine into this. I think it's really fun.
Which also is so like, I cannot imagine that the author was that much in tune with like the typical male, but that is you hear guys talk about this all the time in forums and stuff where they're like, yeah, I had no clue she was hitting on me, like no idea. And it's like, bro, she left you a special thing. It's exactly your type of gift that you would love, and you're like, you don't even think about where it came from or why. And but anyway, he's intentionally an idiot as part of the thing, and I just had to eventually stop being angry at him.
Yeah, you have to kind of let it be funny. Like the fact that he's like, ugh, what is this doing here? And then he just like goes to sleep annoyed, spends the next 3 days stewing, and then when they get like alone time together, she's like, oh, what did you think of that? Like, if essentially what she did is she this is the modern equivalent of like, she left him like a book as a gift, and he read it and went, all right, wonder where that came from. And then she's like, hey, what did you think of the book I got you? And he's like, oh, that was from you? It's like, yeah. Who else do you know here that would have left it on your pillow? You fucking idiot. Like, it's so good.
It's also interesting in that I figured that was the type of story or whatever, or history that he would be very much against, because he is depicted as being so practical and so scientifically minded that like all of those descriptions, he would just be like, that wasn't a demon, it was just the bough on the tree broke. The tree was dry and it was windy and it broke, you know. So that hit me as being really odd.
He
and it would have made a lot of sense if he knew it was from her. Then it makes a lot of sense. He's like devouring every word because it was from her. But when he doesn't know it's from her, then it was really confusing.
Well, what ends up being interesting about that to me is that he does kind of think through whether or not this is true. Like, he goes through that struggle of like, wait, is that right? Like, do I believe this or not? And then later on, he has that thought of like, oh man, like I wish I believed like Aurora did, but I like struggle to, but I want to. Like I think, to be generous to the book, he does have those thoughts throughout the next like couple chapters where he is wrestling with that stuff. you're right. It's noteworthy he doesn't outrightly dismiss it, but at the same time, if you think about the fact that all of the description we got of the first part of the book is from Felix as a narrator, he also believes a bunch of stuff about the gypsies that is like not true. And he's like filling in gaps and stuff like that all the time in his knowledge of how the world works. So I don't know. I know what you're saying. I'm just not so super willing to be like, yeah, he should have been outright dismissive.
You just triggered a memory of something else that was really odd. Is that who is the narrator of the book? Because it's not written, or maybe it is written like it's Felix, but it's written like way in the future or something. But the several times throughout the thing, it's piecing, is, you know, like this guy who's whoever wrote this book is trying to piece together what happened, what catastrophe happened in the old world, and is trying to build this history to piece together. And there is one other historian that he's constantly ragging on that's like, well, this guy thinks this, but there's no way that idiot could be. And I'm like, what is this? Like, he's got this like scholarly enemy out there.
It's great.
And he's constantly ragging on him. And I'm like, shouldn't he be your friend? Like, there's two of you. There's two historians, and you hate this guy.
It does feel a bit like this is maybe written from the future of Felix, and this is like a guy who works for Felix or is like doing, like, I don't know, yeah, but it's unclear. And I like that it's never, like, it's not written in first person, but it occasionally will assume the perspective of like another character. Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't think that, I would love for someone to like do the work to put together like the meta layer there of like what this narrator is doing and why they're writing it. I'm sure it's all in here. But I like that it just occasionally produces some really confounding details where you go, what, how do they know that? Is that true? Like, I like that.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that was kind of delivered as assumed truth, and you kind of cock your head and you're like, I don't know about that, but I'll let you have it because we don't have anything else.
Yeah, it does kind of have that quality where you go, sure, why not? Another piece I'd noted, which I wasn't sure if this was noteworthy to you or not, but on the second day, Aurora stages an adaptation of Antigone, which I thought was really fascinating, which she appears to have translated herself.
Yeah, that it flagged for me in probably like the opposite reason that it would have for you, because like the entire premise of this play still existing was like that it was of the time before the ancients, which made it more memorable, and so they were able to save it throughout all this time, and that kind of broke me. And I was like, so how would something that was like written by Aristotle be more memorable than Taylor Swift? Like, I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it's Sophocles, but that's neither here nor there. Well, here's the question. How do we still have things like Antigone and the Medea and the Greek tragedies? Like, they survived to now. And I think that part of the way that he describes the appeal is like, yeah, you're right, that they feel, in being so thoroughly ancient, they feel much more prescient and kind of timeless. Like, it's interesting that she doesn't stage like Shakespeare or something, right?
Well, I had said the same thing. I'm sure. I don't remember it, but I'm positive I said the same thing about Station 11 when we were going through it, and I'm like, why are they doing these plays? It makes no sense because, but anyway, I don't know if that's a thematic theme where it just, the author is including that because it hits certain tones, or if that's just really realistic that when we, if humanity devolves, then our entertainment would go way back, and we wouldn't be telling the story of, we wouldn't be retelling the story of Fallout or something. We wouldn't be telling that to our kids. We wouldn't be talking about, oh, let me tell you about this video game I played. It's called The Division. No, we'd be talking about Romeo and Juliet or something. I don't know.
I think part of it is that, like, if you go back to a cultural, barbarous moment, plays are really easy to stage as entertainment. Like, you just need like a bunch of guys and a place to perform ultimately. And I think that's part of why writers find this a compelling line, is like, yeah, it would be easy to just put on a play. And then I think the simple answer is that, like, why is it always some really like seminal canonical work? Because authors are fucking nerds, man. We go, oh, let me put Shakespeare in here. Let me put Antigone in here. You know what I mean? It's, I think there's an instinct to go, how can I make these things rhyme and have thoughts about each other? Like the fact that it's like Antigone is interesting, not like the Medea or something else, contemporary to that Greek tragic moment. Like it specifically goes for something that is they're all ultimately tragedies. But I guess, and Antigone is a lot more like, it's about two brothers, to begin with, and then, Creon, and this big crime that's revealed. Like, I think it's deliberately chosen because it does kind of rhyme with the story, in the sense of like, there's like tribes that are at war. There's two brothers that are central characters, and then there's this like thing that has to be solved, by some great work of drama, like some great work of like crossing a threshold. So I think it's also that it thematically rhymes with the book itself.
Now I'm thinking of, I was just rewatching back through the version of Hamlet that we covered, and I've enjoyed it so much. I've gone through it multiple times since our coverage, and while I was enjoying the prose, it kind of hit me. I was like, how could you memorize all this, and then if all you had to go on was like this was passed down from generation to generation, and parts of it are going to get lost along the way, and what would it turn into? Because they talk about some of the stuff was written down, but then the books are literally disintegrating, so they're having to like copy them over, but then pages get lost and all this kind of stuff. And like, would it be the same story at all? And I don't know.
Yeah, well, totally. I mean, especially with the Greek tragedies as well, like they're translated differently by different people, so you get slight variations. And like even Antigone, for example, there was a play of the same name, like that existed at the same time, that was written by Euripides, which is really confusing. And that play was lost, whereas this one wasn't. So like, yeah, you're not wrong. There's a lot that goes into thinking about what kind of stories are told based on what information like perseveres. But I guess the reason that we're given in the story is that it's Aurora's favorite. In some indefinable manner, the spirit of the ancient Greeks seemed to her in accord with the times. For men had or appeared to have so little control over their own lives that they might well imagine themselves overruled by destiny. Communication between one place or another was difficult. The division of society into castes and the iron tyranny of arms prevented the individual from making any progress in lifting himself out of the groove in which he was born, except by the rarest opportunity, unless specially favored by fortune. As men were born, so they lived. They could not advance, and when this is the case, the idea of fate is always predominant. The workings of destiny and the irresistible overpowering both the good and evil disposed, such as were traced in the Greek drama, were paralleled in the lives of many a miserable slave at that day. They were forced to endure, for there was no possibility of effort. Aurora saw this and felt deeply. Ever anxious as she was for the good of all, she saw the sadness that reigned even in the midst of the fresh foliage of spring and among the flowers. It was fate. It was Sophocles. So she's kind of seeing that kind of mirrored in the Greek tragedy, right? This idea of, for those who aren't English majors, or didn't have the privilege of covering some of this stuff in high school, the Greek tragedy is always concerning itself with like a singular character. They're often kind of a nobody in society. They're often at the whim of like kings and like the ruling class. And then the kind of the way the stories always end up resolving is that toward the end of the play, the gods step in and they ultimately decide what should happen, and they kind of lay down the destiny that's always tragic for the protagonists, and they either have to like corrupt themselves in order to try and overcome it, or the corruption is the destiny, right? Think about like in the Medea, she ultimately, in order to preserve her status in society, she ultimately ends up killing her own children, which was her destiny the whole time that she was trying to escape. They're these big kind of epic sweeping tragedies. And, Antigone ultimately, he ends up kind of destroying the House of Creon, which was the one thing that he kind of set out not to do. So, so they're very big and sweeping, and there's always forces that they can't control that are beyond them, like destiny or kings or queens or whatever.
I remember reading that bit that you describing how the people can't escape this, and you're born into your caste and you can't get out of it, and it hit so true from what so many people are struggling with today. And there was several videos that Josh Johnson had done recently where he was talking about like the terrible place that the manosphere is in, where these young guys are getting grifted because they don't feel like they have any hope for the future, and like the description was in this book that was written however long ago, and I don't know, it was really, really fascinating to see that we haven't come anywhere. And come this apocalypse in 1,000 years, we'll be right back there again, because that just kind of seems to be where humanity ends up.
Yeah, it's almost like money might be the problem. Ultimately, maybe, who would have guessed? Yeah, so that's kind of like the big party. As you say, he does have that conversation with Aurora after the party. I don't know if there's anything that I wanted to talk about in particular there. Yeah, there's nothing in particular I want to call out, other than they genuinely do seem to have, like, they do genuinely seem to love each other. But he ultimately, he ultimately decides to set out because of her, because he's like, well, if I don't do this, I can never be with her. So this is like kind of, that becomes his motivating factor. And so,
which is also like their whole relationship is one of those like, why?
I know.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah. Hey, look, sometimes when you're young, you just like someone and you can't explain why. But it also makes sense. I mean, like she has a bit of like the kind of poetic intelligence to her that he has.
Yeah. And they sort of grew up together, if they're roughly the same age, and these are the Hearth families that have had this really tight relationship. And assumedly she has seen a different side of him. Probably he probably didn't get like super jaded until he got old enough to realize that his dad wasn't going to court and wasn't going to be favored, and then thus he would not be favored in all of this. So he may have been a really different person before he hit his like later teen years or whatever. So but we don't see that. So it's kind of interesting, because the whole time, like all of the descriptions of Aurora and everything, and then you're comparing that to Felix, and I'm like, why is she after him? And then I don't know if that like helps or hurts the story, because part of me kept thinking like, he's going to do all of this, he's going to get back, and then the last chapter is she is happily married to somebody else.
Think that, yeah. I mean, he acknowledges that this pride that he's experiencing is fairly recent, to be fair. He's like, this has only really occurred to him lately, that like he's kind of trapped, and he knows this pride is like a bad thing. But yes, I did also have that thought. It is interesting where the book ends, but ultimately he launches off with his canoe, and has this notion of like, I need to find a way to like rise my, increase my status in society somehow. I'm going to go on this like little adventure. Goes across the lake. He follows like a ship. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's really uninteresting to read, but I guess is like fine. There's a lot of thinking about sailing in this book. One thing I really like is the first city he comes to. It's really, really cool. So there's like this big stone city, and it's like really innately built, and it's like dead quiet. And then he's like trying to figure out how to get in, and like the ferryman won't take him in. And then he finds this second city that's like hidden from like the lake. That's the city where people actually live, and it's like that's where the non-noble people live, and that's where all the actual people are, because all the noble people are at war with the king, and so the main city is empty, and then the second city is the one where the people are. And I just thought that was like a really, really cool bit of world building. And that like the roofs were like covered in shingles so that you couldn't like destroy the city with fire arrows, which is what the Vikings used to do. I thought that was really cool.
Except I don't remember which specific town it was, but there was one where they were like, yeah, just this place burns down all the time, and it's cheaper to just build new houses because trees are so plentiful that it's actually better to just build entire new houses for people than to do all this work shingling all of the different ones.
I think that was the
but
yeah.
But I also adored that that little bit of detail, and the fact that he was later able to tell the king, like, your home's kind of unprotected. They could just come at it while you're off here, playing war
and sucking at it too. But I really like the kind of double the two cities thing. I think is really cool. And makes a reappearance in Gmorth's Book of the New Sun as well, and kind of reconfigures that in some pretty interesting ways. And yeah, so he basically decides that he is going to give his service to the king in service of this war, and presumably win some kind of glory or some kind of favor in doing so. He gets to the war, and he's immediately confronted by it. There's like actual slave, like they have the concept of slavery where he's from, but like no one really exercises it. Here, there's like slaves being like killed in broad daylight. If you get speaking to the wrong person, you might just become a slave forever if you don't say the right thing. He starts to have a lot of anxiety about this, and ultimately he manages to sign up as a knave, even though he's technically of a higher status than the people he's serving. But surprisingly, he kind of makes friends, sort of. Like, he gets along with the men, I think, for the first time in his life. Watches this big fight, and that's when he gets the idea of like, man, our king sucks at this. Like, he sends like 4 knights up the battlements. There's no real plan to this. They almost die, and he starts running his mouth about how the king sucks. Because he's feeling sick himself.
This king is supposed to be like a huge military genius and is like renowned all across the region, and so that's why it's so that's why it makes such a big impact on Felix to be watching all of this stuff, and like none of it really makes sense. But then it also, I kind of had the thought that what is considered military genius at this point in time, because Felix might have an entirely different interpretation based on the fact that he's done historical learning, and so they might, in this time, they might think that someone who's a genius is someone who was like, what if we used a ladder?
Like, well, kind of. Like, he points out he points out the fundamental, like, two, like, so there's three forts in a row, and he points out the fundamental stupidity of the king, which is the king is attacking, and he's like, oh, I'm going to attack them in a row. Like, I'm going to go from 1 to this 3, right? He's like, I'm going to go from left to right, basically. And Felix is like, wait. But if you do that, couldn't the two armies of the other two forts just group together and come and kill you? Shouldn't you take out the middle one so that they're separated? Like, first principles, like basic stuff. And that's apparently like, it's never occurred to the king. The king is also just like a drunk who doesn't really do anything, is the other issue here. He's just lazing about. He's at one point when Felix gets captured for his treason and saying all this shit. The king has like a feast and then just has like a full on like hour-long nap, and everyone just has to be quiet while he's having his nap. Like,
yeah, it was actually giving me like real Robert Baratheon vibes.
Oh yeah.
Because like he's supposed to, like this king is like an enormous guy, and it's like they had to have a special horse that was big enough to carry him because like his axe could cleave a man in twain and that kind of thing. And I don't think that the actor in Game of Thrones actually portrayed that, but like in the book, he was supposed to be like way bigger of a of a man than he was in actually depicted, and that's what this guy kind of appeared to be.
Yeah, I love
it. So it may be more that he was much more of he was the warrior soldier who got promoted to be a king, even though he was just supposed to be out there killing, which is people being promoted past their point of where they should be is unfortunately all too common.
Yeah. Well, and also Felix is just an absolute judgmental asshole to everyone. So it's also possible that like the king is mostly fine and normal and Felix just sucks. Yeah. But yeah, so he gets captured, manages to like convince the king of his strategy, but then as we said in the summary, just like can't stop himself, pitches the idea of building a trebuchet, and everyone is like, what are you, that's ridiculous. You're making shit up. You're an idiot. And he just completely blows this entire exchange. And yeah, they run him out of camp, and he heads back to his canoe. And has a big nap.
That part also hit me as being like so weird. So Felix was brought before the king basically as like a trial because they were going to execute Felix's immediate boss, who was like the head of the horse people or something, like the people taking care of the horses. And he just like started working, like Felix just started working for him. He just was like, oh yeah, I'm employed here. And the head of the stable head was like, I've never seen him before in my life, but he just like snuck on and started working. And so Felix starts talking to the king and is like, he's using this high speech that only the noble people use. So that was one immediate like, oh, this is taking the king aback. And then he like, says all of these things that you should have been doing this and this and this and this. And then someone else in the crowd speaks up and he's like, oh, hey, by the way, this guy like invented a new way for us to fire our crossbows, our huge war crossbows. And it's way more efficient. And so all of that put together and it's like, oh, this guy's got a brain on him that is very unique. And then you take that bit of information and he says, I can invent something that will break down a wall. And they don't put those two pieces of information together.
Yeah.
And that hurt me. Like,
hey man,
he was like, oh, you can invent a new trigger? That's amazing. You can't do this though. You can't break down a wall. That you must be tricking me. You're a jokester.
Yeah.
And
listen, sometimes you say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, Because the second the king is like, everyone else is then pretending to be like, yeah, this is ridiculous. Like they all follow his lead.
At the time, I had that same reaction where I was like, oh, you just shut up, Felix, shut up. But then also I was like, everyone else is kind of taking this too far. Like, I think if Felix had been a little calmer and had just been like, I will wager my right hand that I can build you what I said I could build you. And if he had just like calmly and assertively stated it, because he has evidence of this other stuff.
Yeah, but he's like over pitching himself. Like they've just offered him the job, and then he's already like, oh, and I have some ideas for strategy. It's like, buddy, get settled in first, then you can start to,
Honestly, I think I'm defending it because that's who I am. And I am, yeah, I would do that.
Yeah, zero, savoir-faire. I understand. Yes. But yeah, so he goes back to his boat, and then he's so tired, okay? He's so tired from this war and this exertion that he gets in his canoe, and he just, kind of low-key falls asleep for, 3 days behind the wheel.
Well, and they kind of beat him a good bit. The king was like,
yeah.
I think the king said beat him out of camp.
He literally says that.
Hitting him. Yeah.
And he walks all day and all night back to the canoe.
Yeah.
And so
and I was like, I've never heard that phrasing before, but that is hilarious. It wasn't throw him out, it was beat him out.
Yeah. I also love that so the total summation of this particular adventure is he loses his spear. He doesn't. They offer him a sword. They're like, oh, dude, we'll give you a sword and a tunic or whatever. Because he can't shut up. He doesn't even get that. They just beat him before they give him anything.
And the reason that he loses the spear was that was weeks before.
Yes.
Before the good stuff happened. He lost the spear because he went up and tried to talk to the king, and he was holding a spear. And so the guards, who were the knights on the horses, didn't say a thing to him. They just took the spear, broke it, and beat him into submission because he dared to approach the outer periphery of the king's tent with a weapon. Which is also just there's this whole idea of chivalry and nobility and all of this stuff, but then there's also that also doesn't really exist. It's just the concept of it exists. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot. That's 100%. It's about appearance and aesthetic more than it is about the thing actually existing. So yes, I completely agree. Yeah, so that's kind of we chalk that one up to that was not a great adventure. So he's like, I'll try again. Falls asleep in this canoe, and does this really interesting thing where he ends up on the far side of the lake. He doesn't know where he is. He has a little panic where he's like, oh shit, I don't know where I am. And he just kind of keeps going until he eventually comes into this tributary that becomes a river. And then that river slowly becomes really spooky. The water, he looks down, the water's black, and there's this yellow mist all around him.
Hold on, let's pause before we get too much farther. Mm-hmm. So before he gets to the cursed part, mm-hmm. Did you have any thoughts about what you wanted him to do? Because I had a really strong one.
I don't think I did. I think I was just what is his plan now? Wasn't sure. I was
absolutely dying for him to circle around and go to those other cities that the king was attacking and be like, I know how to defeat them. I have lived with them. I know all of I can tell you how to attack the king's city and take his city from behind, and I could build you weapons that will knock down stone walls. And so the king sees the trebuchets that Felix says he could build and laughed at, and then the king sees those knock down his own walls. I was dying for that to happen.
Didn't even occur to me. But it also didn't occur to Felix, to be fair.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. No, yeah, I didn't even think about it. I was just like, oh, he's probably going to fuck around in his boat a bit, which is what he did. Which is a very weird chapter. Chapter 22 is so weird. This is where it really felt like a picaresque to me, because it's this has ostensibly nothing to do with the previous part of the book. This is not
and
related
yet it
in any
does,
way.
Because it's all... But it's describing nature, it's describing the movement of his boat and all this stuff, so it fits so well with everything else.
From a plot perspective.
Tonally... Well, okay, yeah.
Yeah, what did you make of... I really like the approach where he... the section where he's kind of trying to work through where to go next. And then eventually he just like finds this tributary that he follows in. What did you make of like this section where he's kind of going through like, it kind of feels like a haunted swamp or something, where it's like the water's black. There's this scary yellow mist.
Yeah, the biggest like red flag that I kept arguing with, like, so the reason he kept going forward was he was like, he didn't really know if it was faster to keep going versus turning around and trying to go all the way back. But like the biggest thing was that he stopped seeing any wildlife, and then actively notices that like he sees the fish underneath that are migrating the opposite direction from where he's traveling, and he's constantly seeing the birds who are migrating in the opposite direction to where he's traveling, and he chalks it up to, oh, there must be, maybe there's a storm incoming.
Yeah. He's like, oh,
But
it's probably a hurricane or whatever.
but he's also a hunter, and like kind of a part of woodcraft is paying attention to what wildlife is doing. And so like if the birds stop singing, there's a human over there, and so you know to watch out because there's those wildlings that are probably maybe going to be coming after you. Like he would be so in tune to what the wildlife is doing, so the fact that he ignores all of this stuff is running from something and he just keeps going into it, like that I had a big problem with, especially with as like smart as he's supposed to be. And then he just gets dumber and dumber the further he gets into the poison yellow mist, which, I mean, tracks, like everything like tracked logically. I just was again just like, Felix, stop it, you're an idiot, stop it, stop it, stop it.
Yeah, his judgment is not good in this book. And yeah, because he's like kind of keeps drifting in, and I love the I love when he like he ships the boat and he gets out, and he kind of wanders forward. And again, the whole time you're like, Felix, what are you doing? What are you hoping to gain from this? And he kind of walks forward. Is this? Yeah, this is just before that. Glancing behind him, he perceived that the faint yellow mist had closed in and now encircled him. It came with 200 or 300 yards and was not affected by the wind, rough as it was, which is already eerie. Quite suddenly, he noticed that the water on which the canoe floated was black. The wavelets which rolled alongside were black, and the slight spray that occasionally flew on board was black and stained the side of the vessel. This greatly astonished and almost shocked him. It was so opposite and contrary to all his ideas about the lake, the very mirror of purity. He leant over and dipped up a little in the palm of his hand. It did not appear black in such a small quantity, it seemed a rusty brown, but he had become aware of an offensive odor. The odor clung to his hand, and he could not remove it, to his great disgust. It was like nothing he had ever smelt before, and not in the least like the vapor of marshes. And yeah, he keeps going forward for some reason. I don't know why he does this. And yeah, and then he kind of he walks. Where do I have? Yeah, and then he kind of walks through like this blasted hellscape, right? And I'd marked to this point because I wanted to circle this back to a conversation we had earlier. Felix suddenly stopped, having stepped, as he thought, on a skeleton. Another glance, however, showed that it was merely the impression of one. The actual bones had long since disappeared. The ribs, the skull, the limbs were drawn on the black ground in white lines, as if it had been done with a broad piece of chalk. Close by, he found 3 or more intertangled and superimposed, as if the unhappy beings had fallen partly across each other, and in that position had molded away, leaving nothing but their outline. Like, yeah, it's like, what happened here? Especially to knowing that like nuclear weapons haven't been invented. This is such a perplexing, like, what did Jefferies, how did he get this, like, how did he get here? You know?
Well, rewind slightly, because this is Chekhov's skeletons. Because really early on in the book, when it's describing London, and it says that every once in a while, adventurers will try to explore so they could try to claim whatever riches are in there. And that's what these people were, because Felix finds that's where he finds like the ring and the diamond or whatever that he finds. There was these people had like almost made it back out with these treasures that they had found, and then they just fell and died there. Everything got eaten away, including the bones, just leaving the impression there on the ground. So they didn't die from anything that had to do with the destruction. They were relatively new. Compared to everything around them, and just the diamonds or whatever survived, and I think it was like a gold coins or something. But yeah, that did really hit as being really interesting, and I kind of assumed that it was effects of like the radiation or whatever, because you don't usually see bones gone, and I don't know how realistic that is.
Yeah. I think
I mean, they're organic. They should disintegrate.
Well, yeah, they do. I mean, and again, this is where you kind of go like, and again, like it's like a book that's written in time. We know he isn't referencing the photos from Hiroshima of people being like vaporized, because that hasn't happened yet. So yeah, I think you're onto it, which is like, I think that maybe these were people that went in looking for stuff and died, and then like whatever chemical thing is happening maybe like eroded the bones or something. I don't know.
Especially because they were the first things that he came upon. I think that's even before the houses.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's why I said I think that they had found their treasures and were trying to escape back to whatever boat or whatever that they came in on. I'm assuming that they came in roughly the same way Felix did, because they were between where he was coming from and where all of the houses and stuff were. So they were trying to get out, but there was too much radiation and they couldn't. And either it's been enough time so that the radiation has dispersed enough so that Felix doesn't end up dying, or he's been irradiated to the point that he's going to last another like couple months.
Well, it can't be radiation, right? Like it has to be something else.
You would assume. But even though nuclear, well, okay, I'm going to show my ignorance. Even though nuclear bombs don't exist, does that mean that the entire concept did not yet exist?
What do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean? Oh.
Like mega big bombs that would do mega big damage don't necessarily need the concept of nuclear. Because a lot of the description here kind of makes it sound like it's the result of, let's see,
Well, Madame Curie
the surface was hard. So the surface was hard, black, and burned, resembling iron, and indeed in places it resounded to his feet, although he supposed that was the echo of hollow passages beneath. Now, maybe that's literally describing him walking on like old streets or something like that. But it talks about places resembling hard, black, and burned, resembling iron. And when things get heated up enough, that's kind of like the impression that you would get. So if you were imagining someone making a post-nuclear bomb site, it kind of would resemble this to me. So that it had me wondering if it was like a bomb did some of this damage, and then all of the decay, all of the chemicals and stuff that was in the city did all of the other damage. And like maybe he didn't know about like, the nuclear part of this, but he's writing his own version of the chemical poisoning that is left over.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we could probably talk about this forever because it's like impossible to know. I can tell you that like radiation hadn't been discovered yet. That doesn't happen until Madame Curie, like 40 years after this is written. So I don't know. I mean, bombs have been around since like ancient China, but like maybe he's just thinking more like chemical warfare or I don't know. I don't know what he thinks this is. The cool thing though is that it's very hard to tell what it is, and that adds to the element of like mystery and horror.
Yeah, because the descriptions of the scenery around London are so incredibly weird. The sun had not sunk but had disappeared as a disk. In its place was a billow of blood, for so it looked, a vast upheaved billow of glowing blood surging on the horizon.
Yeah.
And you're assuming that all of this is just the vapors coming up are either making him hallucinate or they're just making the sun's rays do weird things. But either way is...
It would be that because blue is a shorter wavelength, it would be that the vapors are repelling the blue lights, only the longer red waves get through. Science. That's how lunar eclipses work. That's why the moon goes red. But yeah, there's some great stuff afterwards as well. Like as he starts to realize what's happened, these skeletons were the miserable relics of men who had ventured in search of ancient treasures into the deadly marshes over the site of the mightiest city of former days. The deserted and utterly extinct city of London was under his feet. He had penetrated into the midst of that dreadful place, of which he had heard many a tradition, how the earth was poisoned, the water poisoned, the air poisoned, the very light of heaven falling through such an atmosphere poison. There were said to be places where the earth was on fire and belched forth sulphurous fumes, supposed to be from the combustion of the enormous stores of strange and unknown chemicals collected by the wonderful people of the times. So,
we are so wonderful collecting all of our chemicals.
Yeah. And then they all exploded. It just fucked everything up. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. But yeah, this ultimately comes to nothing. This is just like a thing that happens. He eventually gets away. Has a moment where he maybe thinks he's going to die on the boat because he can't figure out where he is. Eventually beaches the canoe and joins the shepherds. They seem fairly nice.
Well, walk back the statement on this comes to nothing, because like this was probably the most pivotal thing that's ever happened to him in his life.
True.
Right? Because if the canoe does not, after this, get wrecked in the exact right spot against this reef, then he doesn't meet the one shepherd. It doesn't get introduced to them. If he doesn't have this experience in London, like that was the thing that they were like, oh, he's kind of a god. He's been to London and he survived. You know, like this sets up everything. And he finds one diamond that is like the most precious thing ever, and then a couple other coins and stuff that are tokens of his proof, right? So he has proof of his godship, and he has a diamond that's worth an entire kingdom. So he could like buy Aurora a kingdom now, right? So then they don't really address that enough, I think. So like again, like his experience there was massively important, and it kind of gave him everything that he ever wanted, and it just ended up looking different than he ever expected.
Yeah, I guess my point is that like he doesn't think that way because he doesn't realize it's a big deal until the shepherds are impressed by him. So like he never really has that thought. He never really puts together what you're saying, which is like, yeah, this does change his life. The thing that he thinks changes his life is that he actually develops like a camaraderie and a companionship with these shepherds and is able to actually help them with his archery. Like that's the thing that he thinks is what changes him, right? Like the fact that he's able to contribute. He kills like 20 gypsies himself. Like it's the first time he's ever been actually useful. And I like that he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't go, oh yes, my riches from London. That is what, that, you know, that's the thing. It's like, no, it's this ability to like actually join the shepherds and to have companionship and to be a valued member of their society, that's the thing that matters to him, not necessarily the riches.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't think it would. I think they would be a means to an end.
Right.
And I actually probably for most people, the thing isn't necessarily it doesn't have the value in itself. It's just what you can buy with that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But I just really like that the chapter where he gets to know the shepherds, and like they generally just seem to like be impressed by his bow and arrow skills. They seem to like him. He seems to like them. And then yeah, he, as I said, like we don't have to dwell too much on the combat stuff. I don't know that it's particularly interesting except for its outcome. Like he gets nervous about it, and then you know he goes off and he kills tons of guys. They manage to defeat and rout these gypsies. And then yeah, he
what
kind of
is notable.
Mm.
The start of that battle. What is notable for any like writers out there, he starts off sucking. Like he's been talking to the shepherds about his bow and arrow and how good it was, and like I think he did like a couple experiment shots to show them, but this was going into battle, and he was like, they kept trying to get him to come into their center where he would be safe, and he was like, no, I can't shoot my bow from there, I have to be out here.
Yeah. And
so then he pulls the bow and he's all epic, and he's like, I'm gonna show them, and he's like, it goes like 20 feet.
Yeah, he shoots
like
the
it goes
ground in
nowhere.
front of him. Yeah.
And then he does like 3 more shots, and they all completely fail, and all of the shepherds are like, oh man, did we get fooled? Was he tricking us? Is he nothing? And then he's like, okay, calm down, deep breath, and then he starts picking off people. That's and great. I'm like, that was such good writing. It was like no Rey Skywalker BS where she's just like instantly hitting every single shot. No, he's got that moment of human weakness, and he has to take a breath and center himself. I loved that.
It's so good. And when he locks in, he just like and it's incremental as well. Like even when he locks in, the first arrow he shoots misses the guy he's aiming at, but hits the guy's horse. And then from there he starts to develop the confidence. It's so good. And yeah, he picks off like what's the body count here? So that's 5, 6, 7, 8. Like he's doing numbers. You know, he kills like most of these guys. Yeah.
I don't think we ever said this, but if anyone who hasn't read it, like bow and arrow was pretty much just like you hunt rabbits with it, and that's all that you do. They're just like tiny little things. They don't have power behind them, but he built like a stronger one because he was reading about like the U-bows of older, yeah. And so like his could actually like pierce armor and stuff, but no one believes that it can do stuff because they don't have that they don't have that technology, even though it's the same. They just don't have a strong enough piece of wood that can be the bow that could do this kind of damage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're like, no, you can't. It's not. You can't use that as a weapon. And so like,
it's why it's not prized in the previous, like in the the Baron society, because it's just for hunting, like sword fighting and jousting. That's war stuff. Bow is hunter guy. It's not impressive.
Mm-hmm. And then, very ironically, like he's when he kills all of these people, and then he starts like chasing them down, and he's like, with me, and then he's like running and shooting, and all the shepherds are going behind him, and we're like, yes, for Frodo, yes. And then so he's now a hero to the shepherds, but he's also like this huge legend to all of these gypsies that he was killing. And so like they're stalking him silently through the woods after this and just waiting, and he, like an idiot, goes off by himself, and they're just waiting until he unstrings his bow so he could like, because it's raining, and so he unstrings his bow, and then they're like, the weapon is disarmed. The weapon is disarmed. Get him.
Yeah. And he runs away, and he can't get away from them. And then he goes, oh, I bet they can't swim. And he basically just swims away from them. It's so funny.
That was so. There was so much of this ending that was like, it kind of felt like it was a, I don't want to say like different author, but it was like he was approaching things more intellectually. I don't know how to say that, to say it properly. It was like maybe as Felix is starting to actually think things through in a different kind of way. No, I feel like it's the obstacles that are being placed at him are just kind of like hitting different. Like the enemies being smart enough to sit and wait until he unstrings his bow, like that hit me out of nowhere. Like I was not expecting that whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's a very schematic feeling ending in a lot of ways, where it's sort of, it's taking all the stuff the book has put in place previously and then going, okay, let's put that in interesting conversation with each other. One thing I particularly like is he sits down and he's like, this is before he runs away. He sits there and he looks at the valley and like the way that everything is set up, and he thinks like, where would I build a fort and how could that be useful and how could we build an enclosure and like how do we structure this space? Like he's doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I think when he gets attacked and he starts to run away, he's reusing that schematic information to like figure out where he's running and how he's going to escape. So I do think it does feel different, only in the sense that he's literally thinking about like architecture beforehand, and then this is just quite a logistics focused moment of trying to escape. So you're not wrong. It does feel different.
It probably also feels different because this is normally the scene where Neo has figured out how to use his powers,
Right.
but then all of a sudden he just like left his gun on the table when he went to the bathroom.
Mhm.
You know, like he did something so stupid, and we're like, bro, we thought you figured it out. Like what's going on?
Yeah.
You know?
It's the subway scene in The Matrix where like, you know, he runs down the thing and then, you know, Smith is there. But in this version, instead of having this like awesome, like, you know, knockout fist fight, Neo just turns around and runs the other way. He runs back out of the subway. Yeah, I also really like the way that it's when he leaves after he escapes and he's like planning on heading home, he packs a couple of extra bowstrings just in case, so this doesn't happen again. Which is really fun. I thought that was such a good little detail.
It's also, and I don't know if it felt like totally unrealistic or what, but the fact that he felt that he had to do this, he's going back to get Aurora to bring her back here. He becomes like king of the shepherds. All of the different tribes of shepherds come together and send emissaries, and they're like, we're electing you our king. And he's basically going to build his own civilization using the shepherds and like educating them so that they will become the civilization that he expects that Aurora should have. So he's already taught them how to build palisades, and he's getting them to clear cut a road towards his home so that it'll be easier to travel back and forth and establish commerce and like all of this stuff. And it's just so interesting to think that this entire journey was him trying to get goal A, but he didn't need the knights and the kingdom. He needed something that resembled the same power as the knights in the kingdom. He could have gone after the shepherds from the very beginning, and his intellect and his knowledge, you know, all of his experience would have probably given him enough that he could have fit in really well. Because like one of the things that he was just like, oh, if lightning strikes there, there's water. And so they dig up a well and they're like, oh, you're a god, you know? So like he probably had enough that he could have just from the very beginning gone, got the shepherds, built up a civilization. But he was like, no, he was stuck in this mindset of I have to be in a king's court and I have to be with this typical structure, and he couldn't think outside the box enough. So like this whole story is kind of like, just think outside of the box and you'll get the princess.
Well, I also think that I don't think he succeeds in holding his nerve in the fight with the gypsies if this is the first time he's seeing actual combat. Like the fact that he
That's a
goes,
good point.
like he experiences the absolute horror that is like, the war that the king is waging. That like when they go, hey yo, like do you want to be king? He's like, no, absolutely not. Like, did you see that guy? I'm not doing that shit. And so he kind of goes, look, I tell you what, why don't we do this? When there's a war, you put me in charge and you let me tell you what to do, but I don't want to be king. I'm not interested in that. So he even kind of like splits the difference on, he's got status and he has a reputation. And as you say, like they treat him like he's, top shit. But he's not in a position where like he's invented a new position for himself that doesn't exist in that previous society. But it's kind of like a bridge between the two concepts of like the shepherds and like the knights. And in theory, this is the type of role that Oliver should have, which is even more interesting because Oliver was really the warrior guy.
Although it definitely has something else. There's a mythical holy aspect that is on him that he doesn't want, and he's trying to figure out how to get rid of it, but he can't. And that's the reason that he like actually sneaks out when he's going back to get Aurora, because he should not be going by himself. He should have a contingent of 20 men going with him.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know how to get back, and so he's got to go literally cross country, and no one has transversed these woods in known history. He might not be able to find the shepherds again. This is totally unmapped territory. And it's, wildlings everywhere and all this kind of stuff. But like he is such a holy figure that he doesn't think that they will let him leave.
Yeah, he's like worried. Or that if he leaves, they won't want him to, like they won't accept him when he comes back. But you're right. Because like at one point they bring like sick people to him, and he's like, no, I don't cure people. I'm not magic. Which I thought was like a really good detail.
Because he knows enough from reading, he knows enough to actually cure them, especially because his dad has gardens that are devoted to the herbs that can cure a lot of illnesses. So he knows a lot of this stuff, but he's like, no, then they will see me as even more of a god than they already do. So I'm going to, hey, bring me like your doctors. I'm going to teach your doctors how to grow the herb garden. I'm going to help teach your doctors how to cure people, and they are the ones who will do it, and it won't be me. So yeah, the book's also a really interesting study on how to delegate responsibility.
Yeah, I really like the way that he kind of navigates this, where after this failed attempt to leave and like when he nearly gets killed, he kind of realizes that actually, no, I'm going to have to like tell them. I'm going to have to tell them that I need to leave and come back. And I just have to be honest with them. And they're not happy about it, but they're like, okay, sure. And then, yeah, he gets instructions from them on where to go as well.
And that's the part I think that he could have, like, he's not the character to ever flex his power, which I think is like a downfall, because right here is the spot where he should have, just be like, I am going on a holy quest. I need the 20 best guys, the best fighters. You come with me, and you are going to get me to my end goal. And if this doesn't work, then you will be smited,
Yeah,
like he's got the power.
I know. But then at the same time, he doesn't want to like, because I also think the thing that he's seeing that maybe that we're not thinking about is like, he ostensibly wants to like set up a relationship between Wolfstead, which is the place he's founded, and his home, which means that the second that relationship is established, they're going to be like, that's not a messiah. That's fucking Felix. That's my brother, dude. Like, I think it would be a pretty fragile facade, is the other thing.
Yeah. Of course, at the same time, he quite literally has gone through the hero's journey to be a different person, You know, he could be like, I walked on London. I fought with King what's his name and told him he was an idiot to his face. You know, I did all of this stuff, and I am a very I united the shepherds and you know, beat back an army of gypsies. You know, I'm a different man than I used to be.
Yeah, that's true. I just think it's notable that he doesn't like to your point earlier, like, yeah, he doesn't lean into it necessarily, like the Messiah thing. And then yeah, it turns like, the other thing I really like is it turns out that having gone all this way and done all these incredible things, he's like maybe like half a day's walk from where he started, all in all. Where he goes, oh, this is the forest. This is the forest to the east. I know exactly where I am. I just need to go a straight line that way. Which is really funny to me.
I didn't think it was that. I had come away with the idea that he literally didn't know how many months it would take to walk through because he didn't know exactly how to get back home.
He figures out earlier that it's like, I think 15 miles away. So it's not that far. He just doesn't know how long it'll take to get through because the forest is like not camped because they haven't cut that passage yet. But you do get the detail of like, I think it's 15 miles maybe. I just remember that number. I could be wrong. It's not relevant anyway. The point of the book is that he's established this new life and he's going to go out.
Well, I guess the reason that I am more focused on it is because I took the ending to mean that he might be dead tomorrow. You know, like this doesn't necessarily end on a happy note. Like I do not know for a fact that he is bringing Aurora back here successfully. I took away that it was so ambiguous as to where his home was that he could travel the rest of his life and not find his home again, which is a very different ending than, you know, what you had just described.
Yeah, I could see it. I mean, I guess it is framed, yeah, in that way of like the Odyssey, where it's like, yeah, he's gonna try and get home, but who knows? I don't know. I guess the reason why I maybe took it the way I did is, I think in a modern story you would get an epilogue chapter where he would reach home, and like everyone would be really impressed, and he'd like get the girl and all that stuff. I like the fact that it's ambiguous, but I'm choosing to decide that Felix has a happy ending. Just feels like he's had a really shitty life, and this is kind of what his family needs to, like, you know, fix their status and their problems. And yeah, I also think it's really noteworthy that he doesn't get, you know, earlier on, he doesn't get the sword because he runs his mouth about the trebuchet. And ultimately, it's his bow that he designed, like you said, you know, because he read the old texts. That's what helps win him this status and helps him defeat these people. It's like, yes, it's his prowess with the bow, but it's also his intelligence and his willingness to like understand from the past. That's what wins him the status as well as his perseverance. You know, it's all these factors that contribute to him being able to do this. And so, I just think from like from a what I choose to decide perspective, I choose to decide that he has a happy ending because he's had a hard couple weeks.
Yeah, the more I think about it, when I was saying, you know, he should take men back with him, like the more I think about it, you know, that was just from like him making it there in one piece from that perspective. But like imagine that he gets back home and he chills at his house for a day to recover, and then he goes to talk to Aurora, and he goes up to her dad and he's like, hey, I walked on London, I united the shepherds, I'm taking your daughter. And the dad would be like, nope. What are you going to do? But if you got 200 shepherd warriors with you, now you got proof.
Well, to be fair, when he gets there, he can be like, okay, look at that forest there. In a couple of days, my men are going to cut a hole through, and I can go and show you what I'm building, you know? Anyway, I think for 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 the benefit of my own sanity, I'm deciding that he has a happy ending. I need that.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty
I mean,
dark out there. I need that right now.
I really want an epilogue for this now. It didn't hit me at the time when I finished the book, but
It is an odd ending. It's very sudden. Just looking to see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I think that's everything I had.
it is funny that he changes a lot, but then also like doesn't really change.
Yeah.
Because like the penultimate sentence, Felix pushed on, absorbed in thought. Like that same sentence is probably like 50 times throughout the book. Like he's always just absorbed in thought.
Yeah. It's true. Cool. Okay. I think
Yeah,
that's it.
that was a fun one. I when I started it, I did not expect to enjoy it as much
neither.
as I did, but I very much loved it.
That first half is tough though. Yeah.
But like I'll have to go out in the garage and send you pictures, because like our bows are like literally displayed up on the wall. Like I've done a lot of archery, and I talked about how like this style of being out in nature and like making your own canoe and being on the water, like this book hit me hard from all of the things that I appreciate about life that we just don't really have in modern life. So I adored everything about it except the opening stuff and what species of grain the black sheep are eating.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, next time we're talking about I Am Legend when Patrick is back. If you would like to support us, the book, I should say, very, very brisk read by comparison, I would say. Like, this took me the full 2 weeks to get through. I would say that I Am Legend took me like an afternoon. Like, it's such a quick book by comparison. If you'd like to support us, you can head to patreon.com/zeroindent. Supporting us at the $5 tier unlocks the bonus episodes of this show where we watch and talk about supplementary materials. Free Patreon subscribers get access to the Zero Indent Patreon chat, where you can send us questions and ideas for future episodes directly. Any support you give us helps us keep making thoughtful, independent media criticism an important practice to preserve in an age where context is defined by algorithms. We appreciate all of our Patreon subscribers who help us continue to make the shows and articles that shape Zero Indent. And as always, it's just the end of the show. It's not the end of the world. Zero Indent is an independent publication dedicated to studying works of genre fiction, brought to you by our subscribers. Head to patreon.com/zeroindent to learn more and consider supporting us. Our theme song is The Swan by Alon Peretz. Our podcast cover art is by Crystal Hatay. Everything else is written, directed, and edited by me, DC McNeill. You can find our merch and books at underink.press and everything we do at zeroindent.com.